In this video of Touching Cloudbase, we'll be following a typical paragliding course. We'll be covering the main areas of knowledge and the practical skills you require to become a pilot. We'll be demonstrating the main techniques and explaining why certain things happen the way that they do. Paragliding is perhaps the simplest and easiest form of aviation. Thousands of people from all walks of life can enjoy its unique appeal. However, it is an adventure sport, and it carries an inherent risk of injury or even death, if practiced in error or ignorance, or especially in the wrong weather conditions. This is not a teach yourself video. The only safe way to learn is to be taught by a qualified instructor. Paraglide is a safe and sophisticated aircraft, but it wasn't always quite like that. The origins of our sport began over 20 years ago, when hang gliding first became a popular pastime. These early pioneers ran or jumped from hills and mountains, and although these early attempts were not always successful, very soon both pilots and machines were progressing. Self-launched soaring flight had become a reality. At the same time, the sport of parachuting was undergoing a radical change. The advent of the ram air canopy allowed true gliding flight for the first time. Inevitably, it was not long before a few parachutists, who also flew hang gliders, began experimenting with launching their canopies from the steep slopes. The sport of paragliding was born. The ram air parachutes were not only used for skydiving, however. The sport of parascending, that is, being towed aloft by boat or Land Rover, was developing along the same lines. And today, modern paragliders are both tow-launched and foot-launched from the hills. So how do you learn? You need to book a course of lessons with a properly qualified instructor and join the National Association. It doesn't matter if you've never seen a paraglider before. The school assumes that you will know nothing about them and will start right from the very beginning.
Right, front view of a paraglider then.
During your course, you will learn a number of practical skills and some theory, which is usually done in the classroom. Before actually learning to fly, you'll be given a short talk about what to expect. Your instructor will check that you are suitably fit to fly. Paragliding is enjoyed by many thousands of people. However, it is not suitable for everyone. For example, in the UK, you need to be at least 16 years old to pilot any aircraft. If you are over 55 or have any disability or medical condition that may affect your ability to fly, then the school will ask for a doctor's letter stating your fitness to take part in a paragliding course. We begin by looking at the site we are intending to fly. We must also check the weather conditions to make sure that they are suitable. In order to do this, we need to understand a little bit about how the air behaves and how it flows around the hills. To decide whether the site is suitable, we need to be able to visualize the airflow. Air behaves like water, and any obstacle will create a disturbance to the smooth flow. This includes other hills, sharp edges, trees, buildings, etc., which will give rise to areas of turbulent air downwind of them, very like a rock causing turbulent water in a stream. Other features that affect the airflow are gullies, through which the wind will accelerate. The end of hills, where the air will pour round rather than over, to avoid flowing over the obstruction. And bowls, where the wind direction will be distorted by the shape of the hill. If the hill has a sharp edge, you will also find that there's a curl-over or rotor which must be avoided behind the edge. However, if the hill is the correct shape, if the wind is blowing directly at it and there are no obstacles or areas of turbulence to create a hazard, we can fly safely. Apart from assessing the hill itself, we must also consider the weather conditions. It is very unwise to fly in snow or heavy rain, as this can adversely affect the way the canopy behaves. The wind must not be too strong or turbulent, and the airflow should not be gusty. A wind speed indicator is a useful tool for assessing both the strength and variation in the wind speed. There are 3 types of check that we perform on a paraglider. The first one is a 6-monthly or seasonal check, and this is the one that we would also do after sustaining any damage or having a hard landing. This check is very thorough and involves looking at every seam line, all the stitching on the paraglider, all the lines and the harness. Quite frequently, people do porosity tests on the wing to make sure that the fabric is still in good condition. This would usually take about 2 or 2.5 hours to do properly. The second set of checks are the daily inspections, is the one that we're going to cover now. As the name implies, we do this at the start of every day before we proceed to fly. We check all the parts that could have got twisted or come undone, or could have sustained a problem since the last time that we flew. The third set of checks are the pre-launch checks, and these are performed before each and every launch. Make sure that you're properly attached to the equipment and that everything is ready to fly safely. When you unpack the paraglider, it is always advisable to put the bag in the back of the harness, as this may save you a long walk later. Unroll the canopy so the trailing edge is into the wind. Open it out and pull the harness into position, checking the riders are not twisted and being careful to untangle the lines. Now I'm just going to make sure the whole thing is untwisted. Right, just make sure the front riser goes straight up to the... you actually have a twist there. So I'm going to turn the harness over to get rid of that twist. Much easier to get rid of twists now than when you're in the harness. Let's try again. The front lines and they go straight to the front of the canopy. That's good. Just check the strap goes under the seat all the way up onto the front, which it does, and the other side should be the same. Yep, that's lovely. Okay, now I start to do the pre-flight checks on the harness. It doesn't matter where you begin, but always begin in the same place and go around the same way. That way, if you actually lose track, it's easy to know where you've got to. Alright, we start out checking the harness by checking everywhere that metal touches webbing, because you might get little patches of rubbed webbing and weak points there. Okay, two leg straps, the bit that the leg straps fit into. It's important they're in good condition because these are what are keeping you in as you take off. And there's a chest strap as well. Same again, check the webbing there. On this harness there are a couple of little adjusters on the side. Make sure that they look even, they're in good condition. That's fine. Okay, have a quick look at the actual fabric, particularly underneath the harness. You can sometimes get damage if you scrape it on rocks and things underneath there. Okay, this harness is fitted with an emergency parachute. Another vital part of the pre-flight check is to check the parachute. There's actually a pin in there on that side, check it's fully located, and one on the other side. Make sure they're in. Neatly done up, that's fine. Okay, now we're looking at where the harness is attached to the paraglider. On this particular one it's got carabiners, but they sometimes have Mayons or other systems. Make sure if you've got them on that they're fully done up and the gates are closed. Okay, same on this side obviously. And then on to the paraglider itself. Actually check the risers, and we're looking here at the stitching, making sure that's in good condition. And these links at the top, make sure that they're fully done up and that the ends of the lines are in good condition here as well. Lines are rarely damaged, but if they are, it's usually right at the end, just where they're stitched, or at the end of the stitch point. While we're on the risers, we also check the brake. Your brakes are your steering as well as your brakes, so just make sure the knot is fully done up, and have a look at the first metre or so of line, make sure there's no damage, make sure nothing is twisted or kinked there. Okay, stick that back on so it doesn't get tangled. Alright. All these lines are attached at this end and at the other end, so as long as the front ones are straight, the rest will be okay as well. But it's important to check the brake line, because that can become detached, wrap round and then stuck back on again. You can find yourself in trouble there. So keep it stuck on all the time. I'll check this side too. Here we go, 1, 2, 3. Looks okay. And that brake, knots okay. Lines in good condition, no twists or tangles. Okay, now we're going to move on to checking the lines themselves. There are quite a few lines, so what we're going to do is walk up all the lines, just run them through my hand. If there's any damage to the lines, the inner core, which is usually made of Kevlar or Dyneema, some very strong material, is usually a different colour. So if there's damage to the line, you can usually see the other colour showing through. So I'll just fairly quickly walk up the lines and see if I can see any damage. and I'll do the other side the same. Right, the lines are rather like the branches of a tree. The ones at the bottom here are very crucial. Okay, as you go up, they branch into smaller and smaller branchlets, if you like. And if you should lose one line right at the top, it's not as serious as losing a main line, which of course is not as serious as having a problem with your risers or harness. I'll just go up there again. When you actually come to inflate the canopy, one of the last checks you do is looking up. If you have a small piece of damage further up the lines or a line detached, it's usually very easy to see because it hangs down. You can clearly see them when they're separated. So that's also part of our pre-launch checks, which we'll be doing in a moment. Okay, I'll actually take a look at the fabric of the canopy, the actual envelope itself. First of all, I need to lay it out. Make sure that no lines have gone over the top of the wing, which could mess up the takeoff. When they're all clear, that's fine. Okay, we'll just have a look along. What I'm actually doing here is checking, first of all, the main connection points, having a look at the canopy at close range, but also checking these intercell walls. Right, we've actually got a top and a bottom surface of the paraglider, and they're divided up by lots of cell walls like this. The more cell walls you have, the higher the performance of the paraglider usually. And the reason is that they are cut in an aerofoil section, and they're what actually give you your gliding parachute shape. In between the cell walls, there are actually holes. If I put my hand in, I can actually reach across through the cells. And the reason for that is, if the paraglider is full of air, but part of it collapses, then the air just migrates through the holes to re-inflate the collapsed section. Okay, I'm carrying on having a look along. If you suddenly pressurise the canopy, like diving the nose of it into the ground, for example, you can damage these intercell walls. So it's worth just having a little look. Inside. That's fine. And stretching out the canopy into a nice neat curve ready to launch at the same time. You check here at the tip for any lines over. Good, that looks fine. Alright, that's the end of the daily inspection. I'm ready to put my harness on and get ready to launch now. Now we need to do our third set of pre-flight checks, which are the pre-launch checks. We do these before each and every flight. Number one is your helmet. Make sure you've got your helmet on before you attach yourself to the paraglider. It should be done up, and obviously the right size for you so it doesn't fall over your eyes. Next thing I'm going to do, just double check the parachute. Again, make sure those pins are in. Good, that's fine. Now I can put my harness on. I'll just move a step or two towards the paraglider, just so if we get a gust, the lines won't pull the harness from me. Okay, just pop that on now. Be careful not to stand on the lines. That's it. Okay, now do up my straps. Leg straps. Make sure those leg straps are reasonably snug. They're very loose, and as you take off, they'll slide up your legs and go very tight on your crutch very quickly, which we don't want. Okay, and waist strap as well, reasonably snug. Okay, just double check. Make sure the 3 buckles are done up correctly. Alright. Now, I can prepare for launch. Tear off the brake and just make sure that the brake is free running, there's no tangles at this point. That's good. That one's free. Okay, fine. Now check the wind, make sure that the wind is the right strength, the right direction. Looks fine. And finally, observation. Just look out ahead, make sure there's no one in the way. It's always worth looking behind you and above, make sure there's no one taking off.
Before flying, there is another safety aspect that we need to consider, and that is what to do in the event of a hard landing. Turbulent conditions, a sudden change of flight plan to avoid an obstacle, for example, or possibly something more serious, like a collision or a structural failure, could all possibly result in a hard landing. On a paraglider, of course, there is no fuselage, no undercarriage, or even a control frame like a hang glider to help absorb any impact. It is you, the pilot, that will have to do all the absorbing. The parachute landing fall, or PLF, has been used for a number of years by parachutists and has been proven to minimise the risk of injury on hard landings. You're unlikely to need a PLF, but if you should, it should be done correctly. And like everything else, practice makes perfect.
Now we are ready to learn how to launch. There's more than one way of launching a paraglider, and we're going to begin with the alpine or snatch launch, which is usually used in lighter winds. With this launch, I'm facing forward in the direction I wish to take off. I lift all the risers set up. I need to remove the brake from the rear riser. I tear that off and make sure there's no twists or tangles. Let's have a look at it there, make sure it's free running. And I let the two rear risers, that's the back one and this middle one, go over. If you have a canopy with only two risers, obviously you just keep the front one in your hand. The front riser goes into my hand, so I've got two things there, the brake and the front riser. Right, same on the other side. Tear off the brake, check it's free running. Just drop those over my forearm, get hold of the front riser. Oops, got a line trapped there, unhook it. Okay, and check. You can see the lines go straight from the front riser up to the canopy. When you're alpine launching, you only have one chance. It's more difficult to adjust the canopy once you've started pulling it up. So it's important that the canopy is laid out well, nice and smooth in an arc into wind. Okay, now I check the wind again. Last observation check. Make sure there's no one taking off, and I'm ready to launch. All right. Now a strong pull, pulling up the canopy with the front risers. When it gets up to the 12 o'clock position above my head, I can drop the front risers and check it before I commit myself to take off. Right.
In stronger winds, it is much easier to control the canopy if you are facing it, and so we use the reverse launch technique.
First thing I need to do is to take one complete set of risers and lift it over my head, like that. And I'm now looking at the wing. Just step away from it. Because it's likely to be windy, doing this sort of launch, I actually take a metre or so of the brake line, just as a safety to make sure it isn't going to pull me. And then I inflate the canopy, lean back with my body, or sit with the risers. I start to fill the cells with air and form a wall. Okay, I can just manoeuvre the shape of that wall by pulling around, moving about until it's even. When the wall is even, nice inflated, I'm sure the wind isn't too strong and there's no one behind me, no pressure on the brakes, I can drop those, tear off the brake handles. Okay, now I grab the front risers as well. Before I pull the canopy up, I'm just checking the position of my risers, because when it's up I'm going to have to turn around, actually follow the lower one under. So the obscured one like that, I have to turn that way. Give it a try. Quick check. Make sure the wall is even. Pull. Okay, turn around, grab the brakes, check it, and go on. This is an A and B riser launch, which is a reverse launch, but in a light wind, or if you're using a fast canopy, which actually comes up very quickly. Sometimes it's easier to put it up on the A and B risers together, and it doesn't come up so quickly. It gives you more time to control the rise of the canopy and more time to turn. Okay, exactly the same launch, except that instead of just taking the front riser, if you have a 3 or 4 riser canopy, you take the front 2 like that. Same on this side, the front 2. I'm now pulling up about 50% of the canopy instead of just the leading edge, which makes it come up more slowly. Just control it there. Okay, turn around, grab the brake, check it, and go on. With modern, very fast canopies, high-performance wings, they often come up and fly very quickly. So it's actually a very useful technique to be able to apply brake to them all the way through the launch procedure. We also use this technique for launching tandem. What we're actually going to do now is hold the correct brake in the correct hand. Now this has a disadvantage when you're facing the canopy, because your right hand is controlling your left tip and vice versa, which makes it more difficult to ground handle. It also makes it a little bit more difficult if you have a problem to control it. However, the big advantage is that as you take off, you can apply brake all the time, you're never out of control, and you don't have to let go at any point. So you have a nice smooth launch. I'll try and show you how this works. You take your right hand, if your riser's across like this, assuming that this riser is on top, the hand where the top riser is goes over the top and grabs hold of the brake there. So I've now taken the brake which goes to the far tip. On the underneath set of risers, the hand goes underneath and tears that one off. So I'm in the same position as usually, but I have the brakes in different hands. I come back up and just get hold of the front risers in the usual way. You'll notice the brake lines there are tangled up all around the risers. Don't worry, that'll actually sort itself out as you launch. And now, when I pull up, if it's coming up straight, I can just rotate all in one movement and take off while still holding the brakes. So very useful for fast canopies, or if you're taking off a slope and you think you're going to launch as soon as the canopy comes off the ground. The instructor will choose the launch technique that is suitable on that particular day. Perhaps the most difficult part of paragliding is the ground handling, particularly in wind, and it is worth spending a lot of time on getting it right. Once you have a reasonable idea of ground handling, we go straight on to short hops. You should be ready to start doing these on the afternoon of your first day. Initially, you'll be helped by your instructors. Normal practice is to have one instructor assisting you with the launch and another at the bottom of a short slope with signal bats. These are a device for demonstrating the correct hand position during the short flight. They help you to maintain course and to show you how and when to flare for the landing. All right, was that good?
Thank you.
After each flight, your instructor will debrief you. Sometimes a radio is used for ground-to-air instruction during these early flights. You'll also be taught how to land and how to collapse and carry the canopy. During your course, you may have the opportunity for a tandem flight with an instructor. This is great fun and an excellent and safe introduction to the sensations of higher flights. In fact, many people's first introduction to the sport is through a tandem flight, which are now available at most alpine ski resorts. When a paraglider is fully inflated, it forms a solid wing, which creates lift in the same way as that of a conventional aircraft. In order to fly, it must create enough lift to carry its own weight and that of its pilot, and it achieves this with gliding flight. The wing is constantly flying forwards and downwards through the air, and in doing so provides a flow over the aerofoil section. At first glance, a paraglider only has part of an aerofoil. The front part appears to be missing where the cell entries are. But in fact, the build-up of pressure inside the canopy does back up and form a kind of false leading edge of air. So how does an aerofoil work? The air that hits the leading edge is divided into two streams, those over and those under the canopy. Those below it are striking the lower surface at a shallow angle and creating a high pressure area. The air passing over the top surface follows a longer path as it is forced upwards over the cambered top surface, while at the same time the air above the aerofoil is doing its level best to carry on in the same direction without altering course. The result of this is that the air flowing over the top of the section is squeezed between the physical barrier of the wing below it and the inertia of the normal air above it. It behaves exactly like water being squeezed through a narrow space by accelerating, so the air is travelling more quickly over the top surface. At this point the physics becomes a little more complex, but the result of this acceleration is that the pressure reduces. This low pressure area generates a pulling force that we call lift. So far we have established two forces acting on the canopy: gravity, which is acting to pull us downwards, and lift, acting to hold us up. There is a third force as well, drag, and this acts to hold us back and reduces the speed and efficiency of the wing. The lift and drag can be combined to give the resultant upward force. When all these forces are in equilibrium, the wing will glide at a specific rate. There is a ratio between the lift and drag generated, and by adding more drag, by braking, we can alter that ratio. This means that the wing is now moving forwards less rapidly, and the airflow is at a higher angle of attack. The initial result of this is an increase in the amount of lift. The greater the pressure difference between the top and bottom surfaces, the greater the lift will be. However, if the angle is increased too much, the air is unable to flow smoothly over the curve, and the airflow breaks away and the wing ceases to work. This situation is a stall. Drag is the thing that holds us back. It is the resistance of the air to anything passing through it. It is friction caused by any surface or obstruction, such as the pilot or lines. The action of the aerofoil disturbs the air as it passes through it as well, and this also creates drag. Much of this is created at the wingtips, where the area of lower pressure above the wing is attractive to the air at higher pressure below the wing. At the wingtips, it is easier for the air to flow around the end of the wing than to push up, and this is what happens. The result is a vortex at each tip. As the canopy moves forward, it leaves a trail of rotating air behind each tip. This is a major cause of drag, and the cause of wake turbulence, often encountered downwind of an aircraft. When the pilot pulls down one of the controls, the trailing edge of the canopy on that side is deflected downward into the airflow. The effect is to increase the drag and reduce the airspeed of that side. The further the control is depressed, the more drag is created, and the steeper the turn will be. The steepest turns are achieved by simultaneously raising one side and depressing the other. But be careful. It is possible to stall one half of the wing in this way and to enter a spin. A paraglider pilot does not need to know anything about the weather in order to fly. However, understanding the basic systems that affect our weather can save many fruitless journeys and can give a good indication about the conditions to expect. High pressure systems. These are regions of descending air. There is a little chance of convection, and as a result, this often gives smooth and light winds, but little chance of cross-country flying. In the northern hemisphere, the winds circulate clockwise around a high. Depressions are areas of relatively low atmospheric pressure. Air can rise easily in these regions, and as a result, depressions are usually associated with cloud and rain. As the depression develops, the pressure drops and the wind increases. The air masses are now arranged in sectors and are divided by a warm front followed by a cold front.
The winds circulate anti-clockwise. As the depression gradually fills and weakens, the cold front overtakes the warm front and the cloud dissipates. If we look at a cross-section of a warm front, we can see that the lighter, warm, damp air is being pushed up over a wedge of cooler, denser air. This forces the warm air to cool with altitude and forms cloud and rain. To the ground observer, this usually appears first as high cirrus cloud. This cloud then thickens and lowers, the winds swing anti-clockwise and strengthen, and the drizzle may become persistent rain. As the front passes overhead, the rain slackens and stops, the winds drop, and the cloud base lifts. A cold front is a similar process, but as the gradient is steeper, the front moves more quickly, and the warm air is shoveled up more rapidly. The result is thicker cloud and heavier rain, but a shorter cycle to the ground observer. Behind the cold front is a sector of cold air, and this is often good conditions for the formation of strong thermals. Eventually, the cold front overtakes the warm front. This is called an occlusion. Cloud types. There are three basic cloud types. Cirrus, which are high ice clouds, and are really only interesting in that they give us a clue to the approaching weather. Stratus, that's flat layer cloud. Of this type, there are two sorts that affect us. Firstly, hill fog, or to give it its proper name, orographic cloud. This can form quickly and is obviously a hazard if visibility suddenly reduces. The other sort is lenticular, or wave clouds. These mark mountain wave activity. Wave is a possible source of lift, but may mean strong winds and rough conditions. Thirdly, cumulus clouds. These are lumpy, bubbly clouds and mark convection activity. They vary from the little cotton wool balls through medium or strong thermal clouds right up to thunderstorms. A guide to the strength of the convection is the vertical development of the cloud. A tall cloud will have a dark bottom when seen from below and indicates powerful lift. Wind gradient. Because it has weight and mass, air is affected by friction, and winds near the ground will move slowly. As you climb away from the surface, there is less drag, and the wind strength generally increases. For this reason, it is wise never to launch part-way up a slope if the wind is strong. When it encounters a ridge, the air is forced to climb it, but the air above the ridge is trying to carry us straight on. The result is that the air passing over the crest of this hill is forced to accelerate through the gap, and this process compounds the effect of wind gradient. This is the reason that wind speed at launch can be many times that in the landing field. The greatest single cause of accidents is flying in poor weather conditions, especially strong winds. Thermals. Cross-country and altitude flights are usually a result of using thermals. The sun cannot warm the air directly. It warms the ground, and ground warms the air, and that warm air then rises. Some areas, such as south-facing slopes or dry soil or tarmac, warm faster than other areas, like grass, water or shaded valleys. The air in the warmer regions expands and grows lighter until it floats away from the surface, drifting with the wind and expanding and cooling as it goes. If there is sufficient moisture and it climbs high enough, the thermal reaches dew point and the moisture condenses out as cloud. Condensation itself produces heat, and this gives the thermal a boost, which is why they are heaped up and not just flat clouds.
When you have mastered self-launches, airspeed control, turns, flight planning, and can make reasonably accurate landings, it is time to move on to soaring flight. majority of soaring flight is done in ridge lift. If we look at the airflow over a ridge, we can see that the wind forms a kind of pressure wave ahead of the hill. Some of the air has a vertical component that is greater than the paraglider's rate of sink. If we manage to stay in this area, which we call the lift band, we can maintain or gain height. This enables us to stay in the air and soar for long periods of time, and of course, if the hill is suitable, to land back on the top again. If the soaring is good, you may be sharing the air with several other pilots, including hang gliders or even sailplanes. And in order to minimise any risk of collision, there are some rules of the air that we all need to know and to follow. If two pilots are approaching head-on at a similar altitude, then both must alter course to their right. If you are soaring a ridge and cannot turn to the right, then you have the right of way, and the other pilot will have to move out to give you room. If two pilots are on converging courses, that is to say they're coming together but not directly head-on, then the one on the right of the other has the right of way. This is easily remembered as being on the right is in the right, and the other pilot should alter his course accordingly. We can overtake on either side if we're out in open airspace, but if we are ridge soaring, which is often the case, then we should overtake between the other pilot and the ridge. The reason for this is that they are likely to turn out away from the ridge, and you don't want to be in the way when they do. Also, you could obstruct them and make it impossible for the other pilot to turn, as they would have the hill on one side and you on the other. If a pilot is circling in a thermal, any other glider joining that thermal must circle in the same direction as the first pilot. This reduces your closing speed and, of course, reduces the risk of a collision.
Pilots lower than yourself have poorer visibility, especially if they're busy taking off or landing, so you must give way to pilots who are lower than you are. On the question of priority, there are also powered aircraft. Powered aircraft must give way to us as we are classed as gliders. However, sailplanes, hang gliders and paragliders are all treated as equal, and we have an equal responsibility to avoid each other. We must give way to balloons or airships who are less manoeuvrable than we are. Finally, the most important rule of the air of them all, it is every pilot's responsibility to avoid a collision. This may mean that you are in the right and have priority, but you must still take avoiding action. It is no good lying in your hospital bed claiming that you were in the right.
So you are soaring. You've had time to relax and perfect your control as you explore the lift band. After a 30-minute soaring flight or so, you're ready to land back on the top. Just think, no more long walks back up that hill. First, look down at the area you intend to land in. Is it clear? Could it suffer from rotors or turbulence? If in doubt, then don't try it. If it is okay, then plan your approach. You basically have three options. You can track in from the left or from the right, or you can turn and go straight downwind. For your first few top landings, the downwind approach is not recommended unless you have a great deal of height. If the wind is not quite at 90 degrees onto the hill, then the choice becomes easier. Always begin your approach from the end of the downwind, that is the faster soaring leg. Make a larger than usual turn so that your track drifts you back over the hill and behind the lift band to your landing area. Remember to turn into wind with plenty of height to spare, as after you're out of the lift band, you might sink quite quickly. Once touched down on the hilltop, the wind is likely to be strong enough to keep the canopy inflated. The best way to collapse a wing in a breeze is to turn and face it, exactly the opposite in fact of the reverse launch technique. Then you can stall the wing, either by pulling on the brakes as you run towards it, or for a very quick collapse, pull down sharply on both rear risers, again while running towards the wing to take the pressure off the lines. If you should fall over or find yourself being dragged in a strong wind, then the best way to kill the canopy quickly is to pull one brake handle, hand over hand. You can keep doing this until you reach the fabric of one corner of the wing. In this position, of course, it is streamed out and can no longer inflate and cannot pull you. There are various methods for canopy packing. The first part is the same for all. We start by laying the canopy flat on its back, with one wingtip into the wind if there is any, and place the harness over the leading edge so it is at the front of the canopy. This keeps the buckles and any dirt that's on the harness away from the fabric. It is not usually necessary to remove the harness. Make sure that all the risers and lines are quite tidy and are not twisted or crossed. This will make sure they're not in a knotted mess when you come to unpack them again. The first method, and this is one usually employed, is to fold the tip into the centre on each side. Then fold each end into the centre and again, and so on, all the time squeezing the air out towards the leading edge until it is a suitable width. Be careful not to stand on the canopy or lines, as this could damage them. Then you can proceed to roll up the canopy into a size that will fit into your bag. Some pilots use an extra stuff sack as well for extra protection. You can then place the canopy into the bag and then put the harness in. Make sure you put it in such a position that it does not rub on the canopy and so that it is comfortable to carry. In a stronger wind, it may be easier to pack the canopy neatly by folding it one cell at a time. You will need help for this technique. Or you can do it in concertina fashion, starting from the centre and pulling it in a cell at a time. In both these cases, once the canopy is folded to a suitable width, you can roll it up in the usual way. Paragliders, like any other aircraft, are subject to air law. Your instructor will cover the various parts of the law that affect us. It is, however, evident that you cannot go flying off cross-country until you have sufficient knowledge about the restricted or prohibited airspace that might apply to you. There are some sections of air law that affect us while we are simply soaring on a hill. We are not allowed to fly at night, for example, or in visibility too poor to see other aircraft or the ground. We cannot drop anything except dry sand or water, and we must not be under the influence of alcohol or any other drugs. We also need to understand the restrictions of our licenses. A self-launch pilot will not necessarily be qualified to tow launch without additional instruction, for example. Your club and association also have rules which must be followed. For example, in the UK you must fly wearing a helmet.
If you fly paragliders for long enough, you're bound to encounter some sticky situations. The piece of equipment most likely to let you down is the one between your ears. Most problems can be avoided with suitable forward planning, and this includes planning not to fly at all. However, let's have a look at most of the common situations that you may encounter and how to avoid or solve them.
First of all, launching problems. If reverse launching, you may be lifted off your feet while still facing the wrong way, or you may turn in the wrong direction and find you are airborne with your risers twisted. In this situation, you should fly away from the hill. Once well clear, you can release everything and your weight will automatically turn you back round to the correct position.
Once airborne, it is possible that a brake becomes tangled or even detached. In this situation, it is perfectly possible to steer gently using the rear risers or by weight shift. You can control the canopy quite effectively, if somewhat slowly, by lifting one hip and leaning your body weight the way you wish to go.
In turbulent conditions, your canopy may suffer a partial deflation or tuck. If this occurs, your priority should be to maintain directional control and then apply a deep pull to the brake on the collapsed side. This will help to unroll the wing and clear the tuck. In severe cases, 2 or more pulls may be required. In order to reduce the risk of having a deflation, always fly with some brake pressure and avoid using any accelerator system in rough air. If the wind strength increases and you are unable to penetrate forward, now is the time to use an accelerator if you have one. If you are over a suitable landing area, you can use the big ears facility to lose height, although they will not necessarily increase your forward speed. If you are near the end of a ridge, you could try flying off the end out of the ridge lift, and this may let you drift back, but will also allow you to descend. If the terrain is unsuitable to land, or if you are drifting back behind a hill, for example, your only option is to try and gain as much height as you can and make a run downwind to try and overfly any areas of turbulence. This, of course, may never need to happen if you are cautious in your assessment of the conditions. If you are unable to escape from an area of very strong lift, under an active cloud, for example, you could lose height with a spiral dive. The spiral requires quite a lot of room, and you will drift downwind as you turn, but you can lose height very quickly. Alternatively, if your canopy is capable of performing one, a beeline stall is an effective method of descent. Beelining is a good way to lose a great deal of height quickly, but it is a radical manoeuvre, and you should have several hundred feet spare when you recover from it. Very rarely, a pilot may inadvertently turn too tightly whilst flying slowly, perhaps while thermaling, and the canopy will then spin. The spin is caused by part of the wing being stalled, and to recover, you must simply let up on the brakes to regain your airspeed. When it is flying normally, though still turning, you can then steer it in the normal way. Finally, in the event of a very serious structural failure or a mid-air collision, you may be unable to recover control. In this case, you must deploy your reserve parachute. A cautious pilot will always make sure that they are familiar with the deployment procedure. Some of the manoeuvres shown here can be dangerous to perform over land. However, there are courses you can go on, conducted over water, where you can safely practice things like stalls and spins with professional training. One of the advantages of paragliders is that they're easily portable and you can take them anywhere with you. However, if you are flying in unfamiliar terrain, it is vital that you seek local advice. In mountainous areas, it is common to find very different wind conditions to those found in the UK, and other local effects. For example, the airflow pattern is dictated more by the sun warming the ground than by the general wind. On a sunny day, this will generate upslope or anabatic winds as the day goes on. But in the evening, or if there is shade, then these can change to downslope or katabatic winds. Mountains also create their own wind patterns in the valleys, and it is quite common for the wind in the valley bottom to be much stronger than that at launch. If you are thinking of taking up paragliding, we need to have a look at what equipment you may need. Like most adventure sports, there's a growing number of accessories that are available to the paraglider pilot. But let's start by having a look at the canopy itself. There are a wide variety of paragliders available. First, you must take into account your weight, what sort of flying you're likely to be doing, and of course your budget. There are a number of good intermediate wings that are very easy to handle, they are very stable, and are at a reasonable price. The only drawback to these is that the performance tends to be rather limiting, particularly if you're interested in cross-country flying. This type of wing generally has about 20 to 25 cells. There are also high-performance intermediates. These are also safe and stable, but offer much better performance. Generally, they have more cells, perhaps 30 to 35, and of course they are more expensive. One or two of the out-and-out high-performance machines which may have up to 50 or even 60 cells, are proving to be very user-friendly, and may be a possibility for the ambitious pilot. However, extra training may be required if you select one of these, and again, the cost is greater. Although it is not the only consideration, you should study a paraglider's performance in its ACPL or Gütesiegel tests. These are independent checks that award the wing a certificate of airworthiness. ACPL grades the paragliders in A, B or C in a number of manoeuvres, A being the most stable score. A canopy with all A's will probably be well suited to the first-time buyer. 11 A's and 1 B may perhaps be suitable. Anything that has got a C rating requires knowledgeable pilot input to recover from that situation, and is therefore not suitable for a pilot who hasn't any instability training. The German Gütesiegel test grades canopies as beginner, intermediate or advanced in a similar way. Let's take a look at the differences between harnesses.
This harness is now set up in the cross-bracing mode. So you can see there's two diagonal straps from the hang point down to my hip on each side. Okay, the advantage of this system is that it gives you a great deal more stability. If, for example, I was flying along in turbulence and got a partial collapse on one side, the harness can only tilt a few degrees before the pressure is taken up by the diagonal strap, which stops me from falling sideways. This makes the harness, and in fact the canopy, a great deal more stable to fly in turbulent conditions. You just don't get bounced around as much. The disadvantage is I can't do it deliberately. I can't use my weight to help steer the canopy. I've set this harness up in the weight shift mode with a single strap going across the centre here. The advantage of this is it actually turns very easily, and I can assist the turn of the canopy just by leaning my weight. However, in turbulence, or if the canopy is tilting violently, then I will get thrown around a lot more than I would with a cross-brace system. This harness has what we call an adjustable cross-bracing system. So you can see here there's a strap in the middle which allows me to do some weight shift, but there is a cross-bracing element. If you should become turbulent and you don't want weight shift, you want to go to cross-bracing, you can actually tighten it up in the air like that, so it actually is now a fully cross-braced harness. This obviously has a lot of advantages. You can change from one to the other in mid-flight. You can obviously slacken it off just the same if you want to go back to weight shift. So we'd actually recommend this sort of harness. If you're going to buy a new harness, I'd look for something with adjustable cross-bracing. Another thing to consider is that harnesses can have accessories as well. The prime one that you might be interested in is the Kevlar backplate. Kevlar here is a very tough material, and this actually fits inside the back of this harness. So if you should land on your back, the impact actually prevents you from hurting yourself. It's got a dense foam part on the inside as well. The other thing, of course, is a parachute. Parachute like this, you can get in this sort of format, which either fits on the front or the side, and you can deploy it. And the other thing you can do is get the parachute in a format which actually packs into the back of the harness, which I'll show you now. Most modern harnesses have the facility to pack the reserve in the back. This one is here over my lower back area. You see this pink handle? That's actually the handle of the deployment bag. And I can actually deploy the reserve. The way to do it is actually to swing your hand forward with the thumb sticking out. Get hold of the handle, and you can just pull it out, you get a throwable package, and to deploy it, just throw it away. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other pieces of equipment that you may need. Alright, we'll start here. Neil is wearing a flying suit. This one's made of a breathable fabric. The important thing is that the flying suit is windproof. It does get very cold, particularly if you're flying at high altitude. And obviously it helps to protect your clothes as well. For the same reason, gloves. Good pair of ski gloves. They're a good idea if they're well insulated. Even in the summer, because your hands are up and out in the airflow, they do tend to get very cold. Right, now Neil's actually equipped here for cross-country flying. He's actually carrying a map here of the relevant area, and he's actually drawn on the map case the relevant airspace, the prohibited airspace, so that we know if there are any areas he's not allowed to enter. Okay, on the other leg, look at this. This is a Vario altimeter. The top dial here just shows the rate of climb, so it tells you if you're going up or down, and the bottom bit is an altitude indicator to tell you how high you are. And again, the altimeter, together with the air map, you can actually use that to help navigate, because of course you're navigating in 3 dimensions. You have to go over or underneath airspace as well as just past it. Right, continuing on from there, Look down at the bottom, he's got a pair of boots on. Don't know if you can see those very clearly. But those are ankle protector boots. They're laced up tightly around his ankles, give him good foot protection. Obviously they've got a good gripping sole as well, which makes it easy when you're taking off. And coming up to the top, he's wearing a full face helmet. Some pilots like full face helmets, good protection for the chin, and it's a good place to put a microphone if you've got a radio system. And in fact, it's got a radio here. The radio, and also looking back down here, a stopwatch. Very useful accessories if you're flying in competitions. You can liaise with other members of your team, time yourself on tasks, that kind of thing. If I turn him round, look behind, he's wearing quite a sophisticated harness. This one actually features a back protector inside there. And down at the lower half here, this is actually a parachute container. If I just undo that, you can see there's a pin locating the parachute in there. And this is the handle. You can actually deploy it just by pulling that handle. This bag here is just for his bits and pieces, his canopy bag, sandwiches, whatever he needs.
Long, slow back up.
I hope you've enjoyed this video and have learnt something useful from it. However, we have not been able to cover everything that you need to know. The only safe way to learn is to be properly trained. If you fly within your own limitations and in reasonable weather conditions, you'll have a long and enjoyable flying career. There are many other challenges. There's cross-country flying, flying in competitions, or even instructing yourself. I'll see you up there.
Ready, on the lights, on the action, on the camera! Let's get this thing off the camera.
Rip out the parachute there.
Let's get this thing off the ground.
Going down. Okay. Save the camera at all costs. Oh.